ألا من كنت مولاه فهذا علي مولاه، اللهم وال من والاه وعاد من عاداه.
My name's Steve. I'm 36 years old and I'm from Birmingham. I grew up in a council estate called Frankley on the edges of Birmingham, which is a fairly deprived area and a fairly tough area as well. So I can remember growing up just being aware of things like crime and poverty and the impact that was having on people's lives. I've got 2 brothers and a sister. My grandfather, Abdul Hasib, had come from what's now Bangladesh but then was India in 1934, and then he married my grandmother, who was a revert to Islam, and she took the name Fatima. And then obviously they had my mother met my father. So I'd had some kind of background contact, although the family wasn't practicing and I wasn't brought up in any religion at all, neither atheist or agnostic. It wasn't really an issue at all one way or the other. I think generally in the UK, from when I was growing up from the 70s to 80s and the early part of the 90s as a young person, you still found that residual link with those Christian festivals which had gone before, although like many people the meaning wasn't really apparent. For example, many people in the UK still have a main meal on a Sunday at midday where they have what's called a Sunday roast, which is eating meat. But the purpose behind that has been forgotten, which is that eating meat, for example, is something special, and there should be that period of thanksgiving and reflection before eating it. So if I extrapolate from that, I think that was generally my experience, that there were a few celebrations in the year, such as Christmas, and at school you might be aware that you got holidays at Easter, but the general religious literacy in Britain is very poor. I think from about the age of 10 or 11, I started to read as much as I could on subjects, history, politics, philosophy, religion, science. And so it's probably from that age that I started thinking about religion as a phenomena, if not as a metaphysical entity. I studied at school, I studied history, English and religious studies at A-level. And then I got particularly interested in religion. So I studied a theology degree at Birmingham University. And after that, I did a master's in theology, looking at Judaism, philosophy, and ethnography. And sometime after that, I studied to become a teacher. A couple of years after that, I did a master's of education, looking at Muslim students' identities and the representation of Islam in education. And I'm currently doing a part-time PhD looking at the representation of Shia Islam within the syllabus. Perhaps it's one of the conditions of modernity, or perhaps it's just a byproduct of going through that, going through the academy. But I was always aware of other views, and I was always wary of wholeheartedly committing to any view of the world, just because one is always aware of other views, one's always aware of other alternative traditions within views itself. So I was always interrogating really the notion of the self. I first met Sheikh Mohammed Amin Evans, I think it was around 2003, 2004. I'd gone to the local mosque in Birmingham at Clifton Road, and I just walked into the Jamaat office and I asked them for somebody who's knowledgeable about Islam with whom I could have some discussions, and they passed on his details. So I started meeting with him every couple of weeks, once a month, and having some real intellectual debates and discussions about Islam and other issues. It was just intellectual curiosity. Over the years I've had discussions with many people, Christians, people of other religions, people of no religions, different political, philosophical views. I've tried to read as widely as possible, talk with as many different people as possible to get a broader view of the human condition as I can. Well, I can remember, I can remember we used to discuss quite a lot about the German idealist philosopher, G.W.F. Hegel, would look at dialectics and how that's reflected upon within the Islamic tradition. For example, some Muslims have used it by way of theodicy. I can remember discussing issues of postmodernity, of ontology, of epistemology, and religious history. I think every discussion, and of course it's an ongoing process, I'd be wary of ever saying at a certain point I know the truth, because that seems to be limiting the truth to a certain point within time and space, which is problematic. So I guess every discussion adds more information on which a person can reflect and make choices. I think one of the things that I've observed within Islam is that for whatever reason it's imported Christian paradigms of conversion narrative within itself. So I'm not sure to what extent a person could say there has been a particular point at which they've become a Muslim in terms of causation, because that may be something which we read back into events and we kind of construct a narrative out of them. I think a person never really knows whether they have become a Muslim until the Day of Judgment. So I'd always be a bit cautious about saying that I've become a Muslim in that inner spiritual metaphysical sense. So obviously the outward manifestations in the Sharia are important and must be observed and respected. So I took the Shahada. It was the Eid just after Ramadan in 2007. So in terms of a point in history whereby I could say I was formally, outwardly a Muslim, that would be it. I think if we read a novel, one of the criteria a person might have for whether it's a good novel, if we think, for example, of Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, a person might say about it, it's a good novel because I feel drawn into it. I feel I'm taking on board the characters' feelings, motivations, thoughts, emotions, and whatnot. If we see life as comprising of a story which we're piecing together ourselves, then perhaps a formal acceptance of religion is a point at which a person might say, I'm now become part of this grand, sweeping story. Outwardly, life changed very little. I didn't drink before. I'd stopped eating pork many years before. I didn't really go out and party. I was quite bookish, still am to a certain extent. So outwardly there was very little change within life in terms of refraining from certain activities that was already there. No, these weren't issues at all for me. I'd fasted the Ramadan before taking the Shahada just to see if physically I could do it, and within a couple of days I could see, although it could lead to tiredness, a little bit of hunger, it wasn't physically exerting. And I guess the way that I see the Sharia, that these are all necessary preparations for a greater purpose, a greater destination, but I wouldn't mistake the means for the end. I did it at Clifton Mosque and with one of my friends, Brother Samir Avzi, who had also spoken to about Islam, with Sheikh Arif Abdul Hussein, Sheikh Mohammed Amin Evans, and with a brother who just popped up. So there's only about 4 or 5 people there. I didn't make a big event out of it because I thought what was more important was just to fulfill that formal obligation. I think when we look at I think there's 2 issues there. Firstly is the representation of religion within religious education within Britain. And I think most religious groups would probably find something within the syllabus that they disagree with as giving an incorrect representation of what they actually believe. I think with Shia Islam it's particularly bad because it's not represented according to what Shias believe, rightly or wrongly. It's represented according to what other Muslims say Shias believe, and I think this is a big problem, and that's why I'm doing a PhD on that very subject. When I was having these conversations with Sheikh Amin Evans about Islam, I was talking to other Muslims as well, non-Shia Muslims, about Islam. And one of the things that I noted was this hostility towards Shia Islam. Many Muslims who weren't Shia seemed, and in fact I know many who still are, incapable of looking at it as a phenomena objectively or factually, and instead prefer to trade insults and going for stereotypes and things that just aren't true. So that was one thing I noted when I was looking at the different traditions within Islam. things that I've picked up on, things which people have probably heard before. Non-Shia Muslims, some of them, not all, but some will argue that Shias follow Imam Ali alayhi salam rather than the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They'll argue that Shia are kafir, that Shia have a different Quran, that Shiism was invented by a Jew from Yemen. I've heard people say they believe that Shias have another Quran which descends from the heavens every Thursday. The usual stuff about Shias are somehow responsible for the martyrdom of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. So there's a whole range of propaganda which sadly a lot of non-Shia Muslims still subscribe to. One of the reasons I became more interested in Shia Islam is because whereas Shia Muslims, the first thing they were talking about was always about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, non-Shia Muslims seem to be talking about Shias first and telling me keep away from them. And so just naturally I was more inclined to find out about them. And of course a person wonders why. Why is it that Shias were not saying anything bad about Sunnis whatsoever? When we look at the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the question arises, to which group of people is that love, beauty, nobility, that kindness of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam reflected in? So I'd looked into the usual histories, Al-Tabari, Ibn Kathir, Sujuti, other histories accepted by most people. And you could see a choice. On the one hand, some people who were tyrants, dictators, bloodthirsty, they were claiming the legacy of the Prophet ﷺ. On the other hand, you have the Ahlul Bayt, peace be upon them all, who were none of these things, and they are also claiming the legacy of the Prophet ﷺ. So for me, it was obvious between these two people claiming the legacy of the Prophet ﷺ, which one most reflected his love, generosity, kindness and justice. My family have always been very open-minded when it comes to difference. Obviously, I'm of what used to be called mixed-raced or dual multi-heritage today myself. And my parents, in any case, were always very tolerant of difference. I can't ever remember hearing any racist comment from either my family or anyone in my family. But that has to be contrasted with the attitude I've had from some Muslims since I became a Muslim. I've certainly been made to feel unwelcome in mosques by the actions of some Muslims where they've made race an issue. Well, I've certainly observed and experienced racist attitudes and comments. I've been referred to as I've been shouted at as a Gora. People have told me to leave the mosque before Jamaat starts. I can remember, in fact, the first time I went, people were following me around as if I was a criminal. I've had people turn their face away from me when I give them salams. I've had prominent people in the community making my race an issue. So I can say that over the years I've certainly experienced that. Sadly, some people within the community, not all, but some people in the community definitely put their skin colour before Islam. Reverts themselves obviously come from their own situations, histories, cultural assumptions. So, of course, the revert themselves must ask themselves, what am I bringing in terms of problems to the situation as well? So I think reverts also need to think about how am I acting, what are my own expectations and assumptions about how the community will react. So I think that's definitely an issue. I think in terms of racism, it's particularly over some issues such as marriage, where people will talk about how there's a sense of shame particularly if their daughter marries a white guy. They don't see people who are white as a Muslim if they've reverted. They've always got that racial stigma of being the white guy. People say we have this sense of shame. People will mock us in the community, and so on. People know that racism is haram, and yet people choose to promote it and be racist. I think the scholarly work is there, and I don't think a single scholar says it's halal. But I think definitely there needs to be a more open reminder to everybody, whether they're a revert or not, that racism has no place within Islam, and those people who promote it must be in a polite way challenged about their biases.